invite interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary experts from different fields and to have their perspective, to listen and hear their perspective about ecology, which is the thematics of this year's ifts. So, and this is basically what we are looking is a talk which will be like nearly 40 to 45 minutes, and then a little bit of discussion for another 15 minutes. It's an hour session, and today we have an esteemed guest, and that is Samik Bandyopadhyay sir. He is here all the way from Kolkata to give a talk, and I would also like to now request our faculty member, senior faculty member, Mr. Vinod Narayanan, to take over the session and conduct this session.
Thank you, Abhilash. Please be here. Don't go away. Thank you. So this is the first session of Parliament of Ideas, and to begin with, we have a numerous personality here, and I'm very honored to be here with Samik Bandyopadhyay. I'm really honored, and I welcome sir to the session. I just had a brief conversation with Samikda, and what I understand is from Abhilash also, that he lives in a castle of books, but his family itself is books. So such a well-read man. I understand from him that he was with our founder, Professor Shankarapalli, in Moscow, and he still got a photograph of his, which we actually asked him to send it to us so that we can include it in our archive. Thank you. So today the topic is the need for reshaping theatre. So we're talking about different spaces of theatre, and how in life many spaces have been destroyed or distracted due to political intervention, and how we need to find spaces where theatre can be effectively performed among communities. I will just read out biodata's heavy resume. Samik Bandyopadhyay, scholar, editor, publisher, translator, lexicographer, bibliophile, and a critic of arts. Has been a Rabindra Tagore National Fellow at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, New Delhi, from 2015 to 2017. Visiting professor, the School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, New Delhi, 2005 to 2014. Visiting professor, ICCR, chair of the Department of Theatre Studies, Fire University, Berlin, 2014. Delivered the Donald Carton Lecture, Warsaw University, in November 2010. Visiting faculty, annual Film Appreciation course organized by FTII of India and the NFAI Pune, 1985, 2011, 2016. Vice Chairman, National School of Drama from 2006 to 2010. Is a member of National School of Drama Society from 2005 to 2014. Has lectured extensively in USA, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and England. Gave a series of lectures on Indian cinema at Pittsburgh University in 1988. Gave a seminar on Indian culture, Brown University, Providence, 1990. Founder member, Natya Show Southern, a theatre archive, library and resource center in Kolkata, established in 1981. Founder editor, Thema, established in 1988. Founder chairman, World Harm Foundation, a registered non-profitable trust in Kolkata, for preserving, cataloging, and facilitating was a specialist research scholar, rare personal collections of books, documents with special emphasis on social Sciences, Critical Theory, Film, Theatre of Arts and Performance Studies. He had been a regional editor for Oxford University Press, Kolkata, and founder editor Seagull Books. Now associated with Thema, a small publisher based in Kolkata, as founder editor. Producer Emeritus, All India Radio and Doordarshan. Research Professor, Asiatic Society, Calcutta. Member General Council, Sangeet Nada Academy, New Delhi, and Central Board of Film Certification. Member, 14 member in the delegation to the East-West Theatre Seminar organized by the International Theatre Institute, New Delhi. Panelist at seminars on theatre, Indian theatre as part of Festivals of India in the USSR, Tashkent, and Germany in 1992. He translated plays and fiction by Bhadal Sarkar and Maheshoda Devi. Contributed introductions to plays by Vijay Tendulkar, Mahesh Elkujwar, G.P. Deshpande, Sadi Shalekar, and constructed for reconstruction that for publication. Film scripts for films made by Shyam Benegal and Bernaldson. Contributed several essays in numerous film and theatre periodicals in English and Bengali. He interviewed Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Maheshoda Devi, Richard Attenborough, Natalie Saror, Salman Rushdie, Derek Malcolm, Reinhard Hall for Film Society periodicals and All India Radio and Doordarshan. Several of these later included in books. I welcome you, sir, for the presentation.
I'm sure it was a waste of time introducing me. Time is very important in theatre, and I think time is there to be used in theatre, visually, physically, with all that we have, rather than speaking and listing and cataloguing things. So I'll try to keep my presentation also brief, just a kind of take-off into some ideas that I have gathered and grown into in my experiences and engagements with theatre over the years, and in the given circumstances and the given situation in which theatre finds itself today. Now, when we talk of ecology in the present context, for me, ecology is not. For me, ecology is not something that you throw at people just like that as a slogan or as a term. It is a crisis in living, a crisis in living which is more political than just environmental. The politics in which we live today is a two-pronged politics, two levels of violence, violence against nature, violence against nature in the form of warfare and violence all over the world, terrible military violence, violence with weaponry, violence with technology, devastating violence against civilization, against humanity. That is all over us. And at another level, yet another kind of violence, the violence of capital, the violence of accumulation of money, property, buildings, buildings and buildings and buildings. And the higher you make them, the more skyscrapers you make, the more you destroy the soil, the water level, and the entire situation in which human beings live, operate, and perform their theatre. So this double violence, the military violence, the violence of destruction and demolition, and the other violence, the violence in the name of construction, the violence in the name of building, which is equally destructive. Now, struck with these two modes of violence, the two assaults on civilization, theatre has to look back on itself afresh. That is my point of departure. Now, whenever you talk of theatre, we talk of and imagine spaces of theatre that the audience and the performers have lived together and shared. That is what theatre is all about. Sharing a space, communicating through a space. Now, if you go back to history, we have the large Greek spaces, the spaces of the old theatres, with the chorus at the center, intermediating between the performers and the large audience, 15,000 to 20,000 large, experimented with democracy at a point of time when the makers of Athenian democracy felt that even if they deliberated on their everyday choices, on their everyday decisions in the daily marketplace, no performance space, no special space. It was part of the goal of democracy, part of the foundation of democracy, for the entire citizenry, of course, with the limitations that women and slaves didn't belong there, granted a limitation, a historical limitation. But yet, the rest of the community, the rest of the citizenry comes to the daily marketplace whenever there is a debate or a meeting to decide on something democratically by popular vote. So it's the daily place where people gather their daily food, where people assemble in the morning regularly under the compulsions of living, under the compulsions of we create our parliaments, where we set up our parliaments. Even when we had our first parliament, it was high up there. You have to look up to it. You're scared by its presence up there. You don't belong to that space. It's only your elected representatives that can walk up those stairs and reach that pedestal of the space. You are left behind, you're left below. And now we have another parliament building, equally an edifice lifted from the living space, the human space where people communicate and share and do their daily theatre, lift their daily theatre. This separation, this elevation was not there. And yet, the Athenian democrats, the makers of democracy, felt at one point that if the debating spokesman, if the debating speakers had a gift of speech and a style of performance, they could temporarily, for the time being, through the performance, they can make people think wrong. They can make people think in a certain manner. They can control and determine the thoughts of people. There's a danger in that. So people would raise their hands, not for the logic really, but for they have their concerns. They are shaken in the decision that they have taken. So they thought that theatre, the larger theatre, with the intermediation of the chorus that comes down from the auditorium as part of the people, speaks for them, with them, along with them, has conversations with the big actors and the performers, the kings and queens and the heroes. The different sharing, the different democratic space is conducted. A theatrical space of performative interaction, continuous interaction. And it's not, remember, just the performances. It's a day-long thing. It starts early in the morning, even before daybreak, and continues till evening in torchlight. And after a single play, in the break, people walk out, people mingle in a mela, fairground situation with food and snacks, and people who don't know each other, they come to know each other by sharing their feelings about the play, their reactions to the actions in the play, to the characters and their acts. A different democratic space is created, and the memory of the play lives. The memory of the play survives. With all the issues raised, debated, discoursed, performed, acted out. So next time, there is that meeting at the marketplace. They remember the plays, the richer, complex experiences of the plays. They learn how to measure, evaluate, check on the immediate hits and cracks and beatings that these leaders, speakers give. A distance from the leaders, a criticality about the leaders is generated, nurtured by the newly defined theatre space. And that allows Euripides to write and play, because he was also directed, his Trojan Women, a year after the Athenian democracy had brutalized a neighboring island just across the sea, Melos. The horror of that can be recreated a year after by Euripides recording the Trojan massacre and the sufferings of the women. The voices of the women are there, heard loud against war. So that is a kind of space. And then, as capitalism rises, we don't have time to I make a big jump. I could go through that history, the history of theatre's discovery of spaces, new spaces. But let's skip. Let's skip to the rise of capitalism and the institution of the proscenium theatre, where for the first time in history, an actor becomes an industrialist, becomes a capitalist. A new term comes into being when the actor is hyphenatedly linked with the manager, the actor-manager. It's not just a new term, it's a whole new sick culture emerging. Capitalism penetrating theatre, trying to control and redefine theatre. And more, the actor-manager's dominance, self-projection, and even, I remember, the wonderful, sensitive memories of Gordon Craig, who remembered how every evening Sir Henry Irving, his illegitimate father, coming down in a horse-drawn carriage, and his mother, Ellen Terry, had to come down, get on the coach. And Sir Henry, in a coach drawn by 2 horses, would put his arm across Ellen Terry's shoulder in a gesture, in a theatrical gesture of possession, power. I hold this woman under my arm, and I make a show of that as I go to the theatre. And the shame and the indignity that Gordon Craig bore and suffered. So space is constricted. Space is now bought and sold in a different manner. Space is commercialized in a certain manner. And that is the tradition. Not Shakespeare's theatre, more popular, more open, more sharing, more informal. Where we have these wonderful pictures from the time, drawings, where members of the audience can sit immediately next to the stage, keep their arms on the stage, and put their heads on that and watch Hamlet prancing around. That closeness. And all the magic of theatre was something that was shared. Not the performer creating his aura, his magical, reserved, closeted space, but a space that he shares with the audience, and the audience with its imagination, with its vision, with its love and care for the actors. They can share, and it becomes real to them. Romance becomes real, magic becomes real, because of that space. Now, I'm recalling just fragments, episodes, scenarios from this history of spaces. In the colonial period in India, we inherited mechanically at one level the bound proscenium space, which never, in any part of India, in the very few big colonial cities, the power capitals, Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, Madras, the power capitals, unreal capitals of power and authority. These became the centers of the actor managerial proscenium theatres. They never became really popular. Uncertain, fragmented, cracked histories. A 10-year rise and a 10-year decline, and a fresh rise again and a crash again. That has been the history of the proscenium theatres in all these 4 cities, the metropolises. There's a completely different theatre, which was not recognized as theatre for ages. The folk performances, different spaces, sometimes just outside the temple, with the, what I should say, the allowance of the temple orthodoxy, but independent. The different space outside the so-called sacred, protected space of the temple. A different space, but close to the temple, close to the knowledge, classical legacies. But its own independence is there. There were 4 spaces: the whole of religion, the control of religion, freedom, wild freedom, the freedom out of which Kabir Tanveer, late in his life, discovers the nurture. And in his autobiography, you read his Odyssey, where these locals, they were not part of his decadent, decaying, aristocratic family setting. They had a place there. They would sometimes be brought in, maybe as a prostitute. There's a reference to that. He had to go to Berlin. He had to be exposed to Brecht to come back and rediscover performances which had been shunted out, which had been shelved, which had been partitioned off from our awareness and sensibility. New spaces start opening up with this new sensibility, which continues. I just cited the reference, but you know of more such instances, such new histories being reforged in different parts of India, particularly in the south. I'm no person to give you lessons on that. I don't care. I don't have the audacity. But with this quick survey, and with theatre becoming more and more spectacularized, larger and larger and more expensive theatres, the ticket rates rise and rise and rise and leave out the large majority of a sensitive audience looking for its just performance, its voice, its affiliations, its information, knowledge about the rest of India, about other parallel cultures. And the more wedges you drive, the more against that. That is my proposal. Let's re-space theatre. Let us try. And there is no single formula. There's no single program, no single agenda. Choose your friends, choose your people, choose those with whom you can share ideas, feelings, your visions, your imagination. Create an intimate community. Perform for them, with them. Bring in their ideas, nurture them. Create small communities, theatres for peace communities. And let one community, because these communities, as they grow, as they develop, not with quick shots, laboriously. We have lost such a lot of ground, and we are fighting terrible, cruel, horribly rich enemies. It's a battle. So the battle has to start small, in small communities, but create these groups with which you share your ideas, your visions of the theatre, your hopes about the theatre. Plays that you have loved and adored, which you can't stage right now. But give a reading, get more ideas, translate it, adapt it, the way you like. And articulate maybe even. And along with these create your communities. And let one community connect to another neighboring community. Let this movement grow. These transits grow. Now, I'm not giving a dream. This is happening. And I'm 84 this year. I travel whenever I'm called to a small place. I go there and I find these groups burgeoning, these groups coming up all over India. I'm just making you aware of them, carrying that information to you from distant Kolkata to Thrissur, and trying to make an appeal to you, to give theatre new locations, new spaces, rather than submit to the violent, destructive, disruptive, capitalist space that is being impinged upon theatre. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So from destructive capitalist spaces to smaller community spaces, now we'll open for discussion. Q&A session. We'll have another 10 to 15 minutes, and please specify your name and be brief.
I was wondering if the capitalist spaces are based on the capitalist spaces, the theatrical spaces have been reduced to capitalist spaces. For example, especially when it comes to the ritualist theatre in Kerala, and most of these ritualist theatres were once associated with temple or any other temple or church or so on. And today what happens is there is a kind of revolution to bring them out of these temples, and they are now reduced to being performances in front of shopping malls, in front of universities, etc. And don't you think that they just are becoming spectacles today, and the very essence and the purpose of the ritual performance is lost?
I'm aware of this, and even when I was talking, you must have noticed that I made the point that these ritual spaces, which were extensions of the temple, but under the control and patronage of the temple, so all its creativity, it was given a lot of space, a lot of freedom, but within certain bindings. But with the secularization that has happily taken place, I would say, which is a sign of progress, that control was lost, but the support was also lost, and they were left to fend for themselves. So, but there is a possibility that students who are aware of these cultural activists, who are aware of the changing demands, of the new demands, of the new politics, of capitalism coming in, and capitalism also exploiting and using religion to create another ritual theatre, which is an artifice, which is a kind of a reconstruction, a deliberate capitalist reconstruction of the ritual theatre, and turning it into exportable spectacle, turning it into a product, into a commodity, and sending it all over the world as Indian festival, Indian traditional culture, Indian heritage, etc. So there has to be a fight, and that fight must begin with you, with people in the universities, in schools like this, where you have this exposure to history, this awareness of history, bring the sensibility into activism, interact with the traditional artists, bring them into new definitions, different affiliations, different connections with another kind of theatre, create other communities. And I'm extremely optimistic, I'm extremely hopeful that the possibility lies very much in these universities, because these can be the core groups where you have access to ideas, where you have the development of a criticality, and you can address these issues and take your position. Be active and play a role there, rather than the capitalist state industries industrialize our theatre.
Hello, sir. My name is Devansh. So I want to ask that in this spellbinding movement of imperfect existence, where we are saying that the world is completely disoriented and chaotic right now, we are aspiring to change or transform the theatre spaces from something which we are calling as conventionally capitalist to a community space where we can talk about ideas in a more peaceful and a more humanitarian manner. So, like there is no fixed formula for that. As a matter of fact, all the individuals that are present here, we are constantly in the phase of evolution. Our mindsets are changing each and every day. So how should we start? At least we can get some idea to how should we start to transform that into a community space where we can just transform ourselves into a better way.
I'll try to give a case study, a recent case study. I'll share it with you in my part of the country. But before I go into that, I can see Maya there. And Maya has been one of our most dedicated, committed activists who has responded to, not used, but responded to the traditional forms in their cocoons, drawn on their energies, drawn on their styles, drawn on their entire physical language, the physical idiom, and brought into spaces which become community spaces where she creates a space where we respond to her performance, and through the performance with a rich politics, a politics of change. She has been doing this for years, so she's an example. But the case I'll cite, it's a case from my part of the country. I live in Calcutta, and Calcutta is on the river Ganges, but that part of Ganges, the colonials renamed the Hooghly. So Calcutta is on one side of the Hooghly, and on the other side is Howrah. And Howrah, as you know, was one of the first major railway stations, along with Madras and Bombay. Delhi came on the scene much later. So these were the first three major railway stations, and the whole industry and labouring community grew around Howrah, the railway station. So workers from all over India, engineers, technicians, and something very interesting, relevant to people here in the South. In the 20s and 30s, when in the South there was this great movement against the Brahmanical overdominance, then quite a lot of the Brahmins who had the privilege of education were driven out, and they took jobs in the railways. So there is a huge South Indian settlement, Tamilians predominantly, the Malayalis and the Telugu language speakers came in slightly later. But the initial settlement, a big settlement of Tamilians, and in Howrah itself, there's a whole village, a large village called Ramakrishnapuram. It's still called Ramakrishnapuram, the original name. And at one point, as a fellow of the Anthropological Survey of India, as an anthropologist, I studied the whole history of these migrations, etc. So just as there were these Brahmins from Tamil Nadu taking on the official jobs, the clerical jobs, the official jobs, the administrative jobs, there were workers, and predominantly Muslim workers, who came from Bihar, who came from Uttar Pradesh, came from Orissa also, came from Assam. They came down to work on the ground in the factories making parts of the railway machinery. And they settled in Howrah, predominantly. The official class moved into Calcutta. There are parts of Calcutta which are predominantly Tamil, Malayalam speaking. And there are institutions, wonderful institutions, in the part of Calcutta in which I live. There is the Tamil Sangam, there is the Malayali Samajam, Wonderful institutions with which I've also been closely connected. But what happened over the years, with modernization, with the rise of capitalism, with greater, more sophisticated technology, all these workers who have come down, they have lost their jobs. The factories that made small parts of the railway machinery, they've gone off because the railways have been technologically changed. Those machines, those spare parts are no longer necessary. So completely unemployed, they have joined a completely uncertain labor force. Howrah is full of the dirtiest, sickeningly dirty slums. Slums and slums and slums. That is what Howrah has degenerated into. Now when the pandemic struck, a theatre group, a committed theatre group, they decided, the first decision was to feed the people of about 10 slums. So it was a community of about 400 people. They raised funds from their friends, from the big city, from Howrah itself. They did plays in Kolkata. They did programs online and raised funds to provide them with food twice a day. They set up a canteen, a kitchen, a whole day kitchen, giving them food for those 2 years. When the pandemic eased out, they kept on the kitchen. They maintained the kitchen with its staff, and they offered food twice a day, packages at 20 rupees each time. So the community that they had created of about 400 people, they remained loyal and stuck to this group. An old lady who was the owner of the kitchen space, it was a dilapidated old house. An old railway officer, 3 or 4 generations away, the family had set up a big house there, at their own house, their property. People have died off. It's in ruins, a dilapidated house. And the old woman, the only survivor, had moved out to a flat, bought a flat of her own. She was impressed by the work of these theatre workers feeding 400 people. And she said, buy off my property at a low, reasonable price. So the theatre group has bought the property, maintains the kitchen, serves the slum, gives the theatre, gives the music, a 3-storied building in that space, with a theatre space, good enough for rehearsals, performances which can accommodate about 60 people, along with the performance, guest rooms, and it has now become a theatre laboratory in the heart of the community. So this is a case. You create your community, and the loyalty of this community to this theatre group, which wouldn't have gone. Those slum dwellers, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the means, they didn't have the exposure to theatre. Theatre wouldn't have come to their lives at all. It has happened.
No more questions? I'll ask it. It's not a question, but I was wondering, like when you said corporate spaces, we have this professional theatres. Maybe the term is wrongly used. It's a professional theatre, commercial theatre. But those theatres are actually more popular. With hundreds of common people coming around in the
I told you that the time was limited, therefore I was leaving out certain things. Of course, I'm aware of another kind of community space dialectic, which I think began with the Basi Theatre in Bombay, who decided to travel because they realized that with the kind of theatre that they were doing, which was in the old actor managerial model, but they soon realized something that the other actor managerial companies in other parts of the country hadn't realized till then, and their short lives. Some actor becomes a big star and then collapses, and then the theatre collapses. And they never had a community, they never had an audience, they never had a theatre culture around it. So the limited audiences for the actor managerial theatre professional system, this the Basi Theatre realized early, and they decided to travel. And in the process, what they did, they travelled right up to Calcutta and they travelled into the south. And what they did, they connected with local communities, small town municipalities, etc., funded them to a certain extent, had their small theatres. So the Basi Theatre could travel from theatre to theatre to theatre in smaller places, smaller auditoriums, which were viable, which were not performing throughout the year, but the travelling Basi theatres would come there, the Basi groups. These theatres have survived, and I've seen in the last 10, 20, 15 years, quite a number of very interesting, call them quote-unquote commercial plays, but with wonderful acting by products of the National School of Drama, actors coming from other disciplines who work in these theatres. I've moved with them and seen their performances in these small theatres, which are virtually community theatres in small towns. It's an hour's drive from Bombay or an hour and a half drive from Bombay. So, and this line continued to the south and spurred and created more such theatres. The Surabhi Theatre in Andhra and several such groups. So that is another strand that has also happened in the commercial theatre which came with the
Here, like, so those theatre groups actually travel to villages, to the neighboring roads or service courtyards or in town like Finance Society Hall, which is popular, and comrades come there. But the other hand, the experimental theatre group, we get high sponsorships and we perform for corporate festivals. This twist is there, the contradiction is there. Thank you very much. So let's call today. Okay, last one.
Side, people use, and even now it's into tier 2, tier 3 cities also. We use social media a lot to market these performances in general, not just theatre. And what happens is, especially when you use mediums like Reels, Instagram, there's a certain kind of content that gets more popular. And this has started to influence the aesthetics of the performing art itself, social media consuming.
That is a very, very difficult, complex problem. Because I understand, I realize the reach of the social media. But again, with the social media,